In this lesson, we are going to learn core concepts of Maven Lifecycle, phases, goals, and plugins. We are also going to understand the mapping between phases, goals, and plugins. Those are very important concepts. And finally, I'll have a demo on real world scenarios, how goals and plugins work together with some practical samples. When we use Maven, we frequently use few common Maven commands like mvn clean or Maven clean, which removes all files and directories created by the Maven build process. mvn compile, which compiles the source code of the project. mvn package, it can create jar or war file. mvn install, it installs the package into the local repo. But in order to use these commands efficiently, we need to have a little bit of understanding of a few of the Maven's core concepts. The Maven lifecycle, its phases, goals, and plugins. Not very much in depth, but at least at a level which helps us in our day-to-day usage of Maven. But before we dive into these concepts, let's think about what we do with Maven in general, or what we get from Maven when we use this command, say Maven compile or Maven package. Suppose you have a Java project in your system, you have the Java source code, your pom.xml is also there, and you have Maven installed. You run the Maven compile command. What you will get? Apart from your project structure, a target directory would be created and you will get your compiled classes, the class files. If you run the Maven package command, what will happen? In the target folder, you will get a jar file. So these are the basic things we get from Maven. But the thing here is, when we run these Maven commands, knowingly or unknowingly, we are using Maven phases. If you notice the parts which I have colored in red, like clean, compile, package, install, the syntax here is mvn phase name. These are all phases. So knowingly or unknowingly, when we are running this Maven commands, we are using Maven phases. Now, what is a phase? Let's understand that. Maven has a build lifecycle concept. It's an abstract concept. It cannot be directly executed. It's not a command, it's a concept. So it's a fundamental concept that defines the sequence of phases executed to build and distribute a software project. If you recall the phases we used in the commands earlier, right? Like mvn compile, mvn clean, mvn package, etc. All of those are Maven phase names. Now, what we would do? We would map those phases to lifecycle. Now, I have a Maven build lifecycle concept, and within a lifecycle, there could be multiple phases. So I have added this phase 1 to phase 5. They can be ordered in sequence. Now here, what happens? If you have different phases, these are basically sequence or stages. They execute one by one. If you want to invoke phase 3, what will happen? Automatically phase 1, phase 2 would get invoked, and then finally phase 3 would be invoked. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. Now, there are 3 different life cycles associated to any Maven project. They are default, clean, and site. Default is the most important. It is the life cycle which handles the compiling, packaging, deployment of a Maven project. It is used very frequently, most of the times. Clean, this lifecycle handles the deletion of temporary files and the generated artifacts from the target directory. Site is used little bit less frequently. This lifecycle actually handles the generation of documentation and site generation. Now, what we would do, we would conceptually map the phases we talked about, right? mvn compile, mvn package, mvn clean, etc. How they actually map to these life cycles. So if I take these life cycles one by one, let's say default. In default life cycle, there are multiple phases, probably around 28. We don't need to go through each of them. I would highlight only the important ones. First, there is validate, then there is compile. Similarly, after that, test, package, integration test, verify, install, and finally deploy. So if you recall, whenever I want to invoke any phase, my syntax is mvn package or Maven package. Now here in the default lifecycle, you can identify the phases that we mentioned earlier in different commands like compile, test, package, install. All of them are used pretty frequently. Now, if I want to any particular phase, say Maven package, I told you earlier, whenever I invoke a particular phase, the earlier phases would get invoked. Suppose I run mvn package. What will happen? First, validate would be called, then compile, then test, finally package. That is the way it works. Let me also explain the clean lifecycle. It's pretty simple, mainly pre-clean, clean, post-clean. In the site lifecycle, pre-site, site, post-site, deploy. You don't need to remember all this. These are only for conceptual understanding. Here, clean is the one I think you can relate. We mentioned MVN clean earlier. So this is from another lifecycle, which is clean lifecycle. Other ones were mostly from default lifecycle. Now you should be in a position to relate the commands used to their Maven lifecycle phases. We understood the Maven commands and they actually relate to different Maven lifecycles and their phases. Now, a number of tasks need to be performed in each phase. For that to happen, each phase is associated with 0 or more goals. The phases simply delegates those tasks to its associated goals. We should call Maven goals as plugin goals instead of calling them as goals. Why? We should call Maven goals as plugin goals because these goals are part of Maven plugins. But hold on, what are these goals and plugins actually? Plugins are basically Java jar files and goals are specific methods with some class files within those jars. If I show you a table, I think it would be clear to you. So here I have mentioned few Maven phases like clean, compile, test, package, install. So what happens if I type a command, say mvn clean, my clean phase would get invoked. But what task it will do? This clean phase would be actually using this Maven clean plugin, and within plugin there would be a goal that would be called. So at a granular level, this clean goal would do the task for me. This Maven clean plugin is basically a jar file and this clean goal is actually invoking a particular method and that will do the task for me. It will basically do the cleaning for the associated directories. Similarly, when I say mvn compile, what would happen? The compile goal from the Maven compiler plugin would be involved. Same happens for all other cases. So when I invoke a phase, it's a logical step, but in order to execute the actual tasks, the goals needs to be invoked and these goals are actually part of a Maven plugin. Now within a Maven plugin, there are many goals, but overall this is the structure. So now if we go back to the conceptual diagram that we had for lifecycle, we had lifecycle, we had different phases. Those phases would execute sequentially. Now I need to bring the concept of goal and plugins over here. So each phase is actually invoking one or more goals and that goal is associated to a plugin. As you can see over here, all the phases, they would be associated to one or more goals and these goals would be part of a plugin. Now if I replace all these hypothetical blocks with actual implementation, if I have compile phase in turn would invoke the compile goal from the Maven compiler plugin. Similarly, test phase would be actually invoking the test goal from the Surefire plugin. Similarly, if I do a package, it depends. It can invoke jar or var command to create the jar file. Install also has similar implementations. Now we know the mapping between the phase, the plugin and the goal. Let me show you a trick where by using Maven commands, you can understand how a plugin or a goal is associated to a phase. You can see different commands over here. First, it is mvn help :describe -d plugin equal to compiler. Now -d is a parameter. So I'm using Maven help describe command and I'm saying plugin equal to compiler. Let me run this command in my command prompt. Ideally, you need to have Maven installed in your system. So in the command line, I have pasted the command. What it will do, it will describe the details of this compiler plugin. Let me press enter. So if you see, it provides the name and description of the plugin. And now more importantly, it says this plugin has 3 goals: compiler :compile, compiler :help, compiler :test compile. So what this compile does, compiles application sources, the source files. Compiler :test compile, it compiles application test sources, that is test file. So I can see, okay, it's a compiler plugin. Now how many goals it has? Similarly, I can check for this Surefire. Let me change this command and type Surefire, press enter. It has only 2 goals. One is help, let's ignore that, and another is test. So in order to run the JUnit tests or whatever test that is associated, I need to use this particular test goal. But how it would be invoked? If I run mvn test, that phase would be connecting to this particular goal. But here from this command, I have a high level understanding that okay, this is the plugin and it has these goals. How would I know how these goals or how this plugin is related to the phase? For that also, I have one option. If you go back to the slide, you can see an extended version of the command that I have used. Now, what I need to do, apart from what I have done, which is mvn help describe -d plugin equal to compiler, I can just add another parameter -d detail. In the second command, I have mentioned the overall artifact ID and group ID that is not required at all. I mean, if you run this command, it will work. But what we can do, apart from the command that I have used in the first line, I can just add this additional parameter detail. So let me go back to the screen. From history, I am bringing this particular command, and what I'll do, I'll say -d detail. Press enter. Now this output of this command would be little bit big. And another important thing, in my system, I have run this commands. So the plugins are already downloaded. In your case, it may initially download the plugins and then it may get executed. So that may take a little bit longer time. First, when you install Maven, these plugins are not there. Depending on your use, those plugins, which are basically jar files I mentioned earlier, they are downloaded into your own repository and these commands get executed. I'll show you the repository location also where these plugins are downloaded. Anyways, let us proceed. So if I scroll up a little bit, this is my detailed command output and it is showing me the plugin has two goals like it showed earlier. Now where it mentions the phase, if you see surefire :test, at the end it mentions bound to phase test. So here it is telling me to which phase it is bound. Now let me clear the screen. Instead of surefire, what I'll do, I'll change it to compiler. Press enter. Again there is a detailed output. Let me scroll up to the beginning. So here you can see it says it has three goals. This is one goal. If you see bound to phase compile. So I have phases like mvn compile, I can invoke mvn clean, mvn test, anything. They are actually mapped to a goal of a plugin. Now what goal, what plugin, we can understand by running all these commands. Now those commands are documented and I'll share them with you. In order to have a more detailed concept, let me show you another two things. First thing, I'll show you the code of a sample Maven plugin. Let me go to GitHub. Here you can see this Maven surefire plugin, it is hosted over there. Similarly, Maven compiler plugin, these all are hosted. I don't know the exact file. I don't need to do so, but just to show you. So this is the structure. This is the compiler plugin. Somewhere in this plugin, there would be some method where the goal would be defined. I think it would be the execute method most probably. Yes, I guess I am correct. Here probably this is the method when we run mvn compile, this method gets invoked. Similarly in surefire, there would be classes. If I go inside and in some method, the goal would be implemented. So plugin is a jar file. It's a collection of multiple goals. We run actually the Maven phases. Maven phases would in turn have default binding or mapping and the goals would be executed. Now, where are these jar files in my system? Let me show that to you. Now, I am inside my users directory, which is del. Then there is .m2. If I go inside repository, this is my repository. Now, your repository may look different depending on the commands that you have run. You may see lesser files or more files, but inside this, I have to move to org, Apache, Maven, plugins. Then under plugins, you can see all the plugins are downloaded over here. Within this, it might be having all those jar files. Let me go inside. This is the surefire plugin. Based on the commands that I have run, definitely there would be some jar files which would be actually containing our goal related code. So now we understood the mapping between phases, goals and plugins. Now it's the time to have a practical understanding. So the Maven phases we did execute. right? MVN compile, MVN clean, MVN package. We can run the goals separately also. How? That I will show you. So here, this is the syntax for goal invocation. Earlier what we did, phase invocation. Now you can invoke a specific goal. Say there is Maven test phase and there is test goal also. If you want to invoke only the goal, the syntax would be Maven plugin name colon goal name. So for Surefire plugin and the test goal, you have to write this mvn surefire colon test. If you recall, for phase, it would be Maven phase name. So if it is test, it would be only Maven test. Now we would demonstrate the difference between these two with a practical sample. For that, you need to go to GitHub, and this particular URL in github.com/j2expert2015 Maven learning. You can just download this code here and open it in any IDE. I'm going to use IntelliJ IDEA over here. So first, let me download the zip file, extract the zip. Let's rename it to Maven Learning instead of Maven Learning-master. Now I'm going to place it in a directory and open from IntelliJ IDEA. I'm in IntelliJ IDEA. Click open, go to the directory. I have selected the project. Click on OK. Let's wait for a while. It is updating the indexes. In the meantime, what I'll do, I'll go to this location from my command line window as well. In my case, it is d:" all IntelliJ IDEA projects Maven Learning. In your case, it may be different. But by the time this project gets loaded, I will go to that location from command line directory. Let me expand this project. So right now what I have source directory. Inside source directory, I have some sample code. Inside test directory, also I have some JUnit code, and I have the form.xml. Now what we were trying to do, we were trying to understand the difference if I invoke a phase or if I invoke a specific goal, what would be the difference? So here first I will invoke a particular phase. Suppose I want to run the test. So I will type mvn test. Let me do that. Here what you can see, the tests have run, only one test was there, but before that what it did, it was compiling the source files. If you see over here, targets as classes, then it was compiling this test classes under target/test-classes. If I go to the IntelliJ IDEA for a better view, if I expand this, you can see all this got generated. Then finally my tests were executed. Now let me clean all this. Again, I'm going to use phase only, not a specific goal. Let's go back to the IntelliJ IDEA. Everything is gone. So what I'm going to do now, I'll invoke the test phase only. So for that, let's clear the screen first. Now for this, I need to first type my plugin name and then my goal name. Let's run it. See, no tests to run. Why? Because I don't have any compiled classes for my test classes. So it's not able to identify anything. So no tests are run. So what I need to do? I need to make sure so that my test classes are compiled first. When I ran mvn test, it was a phase. What happened? If you recall this particular life cycle, right? I invoked test, but what happened? Validate got called, compile got called, and then test. So the compile phase made sure that everything was compiled. And ultimately, when the test was run, the tests got executed. But when I am invoking only the goal, nothing is there. So what I need to do? Now I am going to run a specific Maven command, which is mvn test-compile. Now this is also an invocation of a particular phase. It would compile the code as well as the JUnit test codes, so that later on, if I run the mvn surefire test, the class files for the test files are ready for invocation. So let me trigger the command. Press enter. So here you can notice that the target/classes, this is generated, as well as target/test classes are also generated, meaning the normal application code class files as well as the JUnit class files both got compiled, and the class files are placed inside this target directory inside the classes and test classes folder. Let me go back to IntelliJ IDEA. In the target, whatever is required, that is generated. Now I'm going to invoke only the specific goal, which is Surefire test. Now you can see the tests got run successfully. So what is our learning? Generally, we don't invoke the specific goals. That is not required. We use phases because the phases have sequences and the phases are created in a way, it is designed in a way so that the prerequisite is already met. If I am running Maven compile or if I am running Maven package or test, whatever, the previous action items that is required, that is done, and that is done with the help of the sequence of phases. Maven is designed in such a way that it will do the prerequisites. So that is why when we are using Maven, it is important to understand the life cycle, the phases, the goals, and the plugins, because in our day-to-day usage, unless we have these concepts pretty clear, we will get stuck at some point of time. So overall, we have learned the Maven build lifecycle, the phases, the goals, the plugins, and the mapping or relationship between them. And we understood the difference with a very simple but practical example. That is all for now, and I would request all of you, in case you find this lesson interesting, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. Going ahead, I have the plan to create multiple such relevant videos. Thanks all for now.